Welcome to Door County Nature Week. I'm Martha Luber Pelrine, your host and a trustee for the Nature Conservancy in Wisconsin. Our work here in the Badger State has a long tradition of protecting lands and waters, including the beautiful and internationally recognized wetlands in Door County. Today, we conclude our video series by seeing some of the special species of flowers that are thriving on the Door Peninsula. Door's unique geology, those large coastal wetlands, and cooler climate provide for a rich diversity of plant life. And here to tell us about some of those plants are Nature Conservancy staff Mike Grimm and Kari Hagenow.
So one of my favorite things about the Door Peninsula and any time of the year is our spring wildflowers. We call them spring ephemerals. These are the first plants usually to emerge as the spring rolls in, and they're the first ones that we see flowering. Some of these we may be more familiar with are white trillium or large flowered trillium, which in some of our preserves like the Mink River, there's areas where it just blankets the ground, and it's beautiful when it's flowering in May. There are several other species that'll flower at the same time and with that trillium. So there's two different species of trout lilies that we can see in Door County. There's two species of a plant called hepatica, which has these delicate white or pinkish flowers. There's spring beauties, which a lot of people are also familiar with. They have just this small window that they emerge from. They flower and then they die back. And that's kind of the crazy thing too, is they're gone by early June. In some cases, all traces of some of these species are gone by early June. And we have the new native plant community that emerges from that we see then in summer.
We do have a lot of native orchids here on the peninsula, in the county. The Ridges Sanctuary, just up in Bailey's Harbor, with about 1,000 some acres. They are noted for the number of native orchids that exist in that site. We have a nice group of the lady slipper orchids. We have the ram's head lady slipper orchid and the showy lady slipper and the pink moccasin and the yellow, large flowered and small flowered yellow lady slipper orchids. So we have a whole suite of these lady slipper type orchids. They're small, but they're quite exquisite and generally not very common. The orchid flowers, the structure of the flowers are very complex, and they're built to facilitate the transfer of pollen from one plant to another by an insect. And in the case of northern bog orchids or large leaf bog orchids, which are flowering right now here in late July in Door County, the pollinator for that orchid is the mosquito. And the male of these mosquitoes will look for nectar from these orchids, and the orchid springs on the mosquito 2 little packets of pollen, and it gets stuck to the mosquito's head. So that's how the orchid transfers its pollen from itself to another orchid, is through the sneaky use of a mosquito. And this is just fascinating. You know, these plants all have little stories like this, and it's unending, the wonder out there, if you start really asking and probing and looking and paying attention.
Plants are really uniquely adapted to the places where they live and the species that they live with. So that's really going to dictate the phenology or the flowering time of that plant. But as we go through August and into September, our wetlands are just alive with some really beautiful plant diversity that I often think is maybe somewhat overlooked in terms of beauty of it and that community. And a lot of times people will say goldenrod can act invasively and it's a field of goldenrod. But in the fall, our wetlands are alive with that goldenrod. And that plant, along with some of our other native wetland plants like Joe Pieweed or boneset, they just create this sea of color across a wetland that usually doesn't have a lot of color during the heat of the summer. And if you walk across there, those plants are also alive with pollinators that are still thriving well into that late summer and early fall season. So that is also one of my favorite times to venture out into the wetland and just see it in a different light than you see it the rest of the year.
As we close our series, we remind you that when you're out enjoying nature, please do so responsibly by leaving plants and animals in their home environment, taking away only photos and memories. The species featured today can only survive if people like you invest in protecting their habitat. To those of you who are already members of the Nature Conservancy, we thank you so much for your support. If you're not yet a member, please consider joining us by visiting nature.org/member. Remember, tomorrow we'll have our virtual Q&A with the experts whom we've heard from this week. Mike Grimm, Kari Hagenow, Nicole Van Helden, and I will be live and answering your questions about the plants and animals we featured, along with the Nature Conservancy's work in Wisconsin. We hope you'll join us then, and thanks for tuning in to Door County Nature Week.